The quantum suicide paradox claims that from your own perspective, you can never die. It's not immortality through medicine or technology, but through the strange logic of quantum mechanics itself. The idea is as horrifying as it is profound. In a universe where every quantum event splits reality into countless outcomes, the version of you that experiences survival must always continue. Even in an experiment designed to kill you with perfect randomness, your consciousness would only ever awaken in the branch where you live. This thought experiment, first proposed by physicist Hugh Everett's interpretation of the multiverse, isn't about wishful thinking. It's a brutal test of quantum logic. Imagine a gun triggered by a quantum event. One outcome fires a bullet, the other clicks empty. According to the many worlds interpretation, both happen. But you, as the observer, would only experience the branch where you hear the click. From your internal point of view, death never occurs. Every fatal event is merely absorbed into universes you'll never feel. Survival becomes not miraculous, but inevitable. The paradox lies in the split between what physics predicts and what consciousness experiences. Statistically, countless versions of you die instantly. Yet from the first-person perspective, you remain. Every trigger pull divides existence into two, but awareness only follows one. To everyone else, you're dead. To you, reality simply continues. This turns death into a question not of biology, but of observation. If consciousness is bound to the path where it survives, then immortality isn't a gift, it's a trap of perspective. The self becomes an endless witness to unlikely survival, trapped forever inside the branch where it cannot cease. At the core of the quantum suicide paradox lies the many worlds interpretation, the bold claim that every quantum event creates a branching of the universe. Each time an outcome is possible, both outcomes occur, each in its own world. Nothing collapses. Reality doesn't choose. It multiplies. In classical physics, uncertainty means ignorance. We simply don't know the result until we measure it. But in quantum mechanics, uncertainty is fundamental. Before measurement, a particle exists in a superposition, a combination of all possible states. Measurement doesn't reveal the truth. It creates it by entangling observer and system. Everett's insight was radical. Instead of a single collapse to one result, every possible result becomes real in parallel. The universe branches, and you branch with it. Now apply this to the experiment. A quantum gun triggered by the spin of a single particle. 50% chance it fires, 50% it doesn't. Each trial splits the universe. In half of them, you die instantly. In the others, you live. And only in those do you remain conscious to observe what happened. From the outside, an infinite number of you perish. From the inside, you never reach that moment of death. Your awareness is filtered by survival. This filtering creates the illusion of immortality. Not because the universe saves you, but because consciousness can only persist where it still exists. The laws of probability lose their meaning from the first-person point of view. The impossible becomes inevitable. Not through luck, but through logical necessity. The mechanism is simple yet devastating. Reality never ends for the observer who can only occupy surviving branches. What physics calls random chance, consciousness experiences as destiny. In standard quantum mechanics, measurement is said to collapse a wave function, the mathematical cloud of possibilities that describes a particle's state. Before observation, a quantum system isn't here or there, it's both. Once measured, the probabilities condense into a single outcome. But this collapse has never been physically observed. It is an assumption built into the theory, a rule added to explain why we never see superpositions in daily life. Everett's interpretation removes this rule entirely. If no collapse occurs, then every possible result remains real, existing in parallel. When you measure a quantum system, you do not choose an outcome. You split into versions that experience each one. The illusion of a single, stable reality emerges only because you can perceive one branch at a time. Your mind, in a sense, becomes entangled with the outcome it observes. In the quantum suicide thought experiment, this means something extraordinary. When the gun's quantum trigger fires, one version of you dies instantly, while another hears the click of an empty chamber. Both outcomes exist in the full quantum wave function, but only one contains a conscious observer. From the inside, you never feel the collapse, because it never happens. Consciousness flows continuously along the paths where it survives. This transforms death from an event into a boundary of awareness. You never cross it, you only approach it infinitely through countless narrowing branches of improbable survival. To an outside observer, you vanish. To yourself, you simply remain, in the world that keeps existing because you do. In the quantum suicide paradox, consciousness becomes more than a passive witness. It acts as a filter through which reality is experienced. This filter doesn't alter physics. It simply selects the branches in which the observer continues to exist. You don't steer quantum events. You only ever find yourself in the outcomes compatible with your survival. From the outside, countless versions of you end abruptly. But from within your own perception, only one path remains open, the one where you are still aware. This raises a haunting symmetry between physics and experience. The universe doesn't favor your life, yet your perspective does. Consciousness becomes self-selecting, confined to its own persistence. You can never observe your own non-existence, just as you can never perceive the moment your awareness ceases. The observer and the observed form a closed loop, a feedback circuit where survival defines perception and perception defines reality. It's not that consciousness controls the quantum state, it merely follows it. Yet that passive following gives rise to an active illusion, that you are impossibly lucky, that fate itself bends around your awareness. But what if luck is simply the structure of observation? What if every living being is forever confined to its line of unbroken awareness, sliding endlessly through branches where it still survives? The trap is subtle, but absolute. You never die in your own story, because the version of you that could perceive death never does. The universe continues splitting, but your consciousness can only trace the narrow corridor where it remains intact. Immortality, then, is not a triumph of life over death. It's the inevitability of awareness over oblivion, a tunnel of existence that never ends, only grows lonelier with every branching world left behind. From the outside, the quantum suicide experiment looks like a coin toss with fatal consequences. Each pull of the trigger has a 50% chance of survival. But from the inside, from the perspective of the observer whose awareness persists, probability no longer behaves like probability. It dissolves. The mathematics of chance assumes a shared reality where outcomes can be compared and counted. But in a branching multiverse, there is no longer a single population of events, only an expanding web of worlds. In the many worlds framework, all probabilities become descriptions of measure. How much of the universal wave function occupies one result versus another. Yet no conscious observer can ever experience that totality. You experience only the branch that contains you. As a result, from your internal frame, every survival, however astronomically unlikely, happens with certainty. Your consciousness cannot be found anywhere else. What the equations describe as low probability, your perception experiences as absolute continuity. Imagine a lottery where every ticket is drawn in a different universe. To an outside statistician, your chance of winning approaches zero. But you, the observer who only ever wakes in the world where you win, perceive victory as inevitable. This inversion of meaning, where improbability becomes necessity, is the core dissonance of the paradox. The multiverse preserves all possibilities, but consciousness can only traverse one, the line that never ends. This distortion of probability reveals something profound about perspective itself. Statistics describe the structure of the total, not the flow of awareness within it. Inside your own existence, you are trapped in a sample of one. The numbers break down because you cannot occupy your own absence. From the outside, the odds are hopeless. From the inside, there is no such thing as losing. This doesn't make you omnipotent, it makes you isolated. In the infinite lottery of reality, you always draw the surviving ticket, but you do so in universes increasingly stripped of everyone who didn't. Survival becomes both guaranteed and unbearable, an unending sequence of unlikely worlds sustained by the one observer who can never stop observing. Probability dies where consciousness refuses to. To understand the quantum suicide paradox mathematically, we must turn to the amplitudes that shape quantum reality. In quantum mechanics, the universe is not made of outcomes, but of probability amplitudes, complex numbers that describe the likelihood of each possible state. When squared, these amplitudes yield the probabilities we observe. But in Everett's multiverse, those numbers don't vanish after measurement. They continue to exist, each representing a living parallel branch of the universal wave function. This means that every outcome still has a measurable weight, even if from our local point of view, it seems to have disappeared. The amplitude of a branch where you survive may be infinitesimally small compared to the countless branches where you die, but in that one surviving strand, you remain conscious. Quantum immortality, therefore, doesn't require violating physics. It emerges from how amplitude translates into subjective experience. Awareness does not sample the full wave function. It only inhabits one of its ongoing threads. Mathematician Max Tegmark once described this as a kind of subjective selection effect. While the global measure of surviving branches shrinks exponentially with every trial, the observer never experiences their own extinction. From the outside, your existence becomes statistically negligible. From the inside, it remains 100%. The amplitude of your continued awareness might approach zero in the universal equation, yet it never crosses it. The mathematics predicts that you live somewhere, somehow, forever. This introduces a chilling asymmetry. Physics treats all branches as equally real, yet consciousness assigns infinite weight to the one it occupies. The amplitude of awareness is always maximal from within. This distorts the geometry of existence. To the universe, you are fading. To yourself, you are absolute. The paradox, then, is not in the numbers but in their interpretation. Amplitude defines what exists in totality, but consciousness defines what is experienced. The two measures diverge, one objective, one subjective, and between them emerges the illusion of eternal survival. If probability measures being, consciousness measures continuation, and that continuation obeys no statistics, only presence. The quantum suicide paradox doesn't unfold in abstract mathematics alone. It collides directly with biology, the fragile machinery of the body that makes awareness possible. Every heartbeat, every neural signal, every breath depends on classical processes that obey thermodynamics, not superposition. The human organism is an open system in constant exchange with its environment, irreversibly entangled with it. So how can a body, rooted in the laws of decay, coexist with a paradox that demands endless survival? To physicists, this question exposes the boundary between quantum coherence and decoherence, the point where quantum effects dissolve into classical outcomes. Inside a quantum system, particles exist in superposition, but when a system interacts with its environment, those delicate superpositions break down. The world we perceive emerges from this collapse of coherence. The body, composed of trillions of interacting atoms, is constantly decohering. It cannot sustain superposition long enough to behave as a quantum object. Yet the paradox doesn't claim your body survives across branches. It claims your consciousness does. Consciousness, however, is not a separate entity from the brain's material processes. Every thought corresponds to neural patterns that depend on physical substrates. If the body fails, the neural architecture that supports awareness collapses with it. In most worlds, that collapse is final. But in at least one branch, however improbable, every molecule aligns in just the right way to sustain one more second of ordered thought. And it is within that microscopic corridor of coherence that you persist. Here, biology becomes the stage on which quantum probability performs its cruelest trick. The self continues only in the worlds where the brain remains functional, no matter how unlikely that is. Over infinite branches, even the most miraculous survivals exist. The continuity of awareness rides on that sliver of possibility, propagating through universes where biology keeps obeying impossible odds. To external science, death is inevitable. To the internal observer, it never arrives. The physical body fails in almost every version of reality, yet consciousness forever finds itself in the one where it still breathes. Biology defines the limits of life. Quantum logic erases them through sheer multiplicity. Immortality, then, is not transcendence. It is biological endurance stretched across infinite improbabilities. If the quantum suicide paradox hinges on survival through branching universes, then its most unstable element is the observer, the self that claims continuity through infinite division. Consciousness feels like a single, unbroken thread, but physics describes it as a chain of configurations, each arising from a physical brain state at a given moment. The paradox demands that this chain never truly ends. It must leap from one improbable survival to the next, carrying with it the illusion of uninterrupted existence. But what exactly continues? The brain is not a static organ. Every millisecond, billions of neurons fire and reconfigure, encoding memory and perception in patterns that constantly change. In most worlds, those patterns dissolve into noise the instant death occurs.
Yet in at least one, they persist long enough to sustain the next moment of awareness. That continuation, even if separated by vast physical improbabilities, is what the conscious self experiences as continuity. You never notice the impossible transitions. You only ever inhabit the branch where awareness remains coherent. This leads to an unsettling symmetry. Your sense of self is not the persistence of matter, but of pattern.
The atoms that make you shift constantly, yet the pattern they form sustains the illusion of identity. If the quantum multiverse generates every physically possible configuration, then somewhere, the pattern that defines you continues after every possible failure. It may inhabit a damaged body, a fractured mind, a simulation, or something entirely beyond human biology. But from the first-person perspective, awareness simply goes on. Memory anchors that illusion. Each surviving branch carries the memories of all previous ones, but none of the deaths. You remember living, never dying, because no consciousness exists in the branches where memory ends. Over infinite iterations, this creates a one-way mirror of experience. All outcomes occur, but awareness can only ever face forward. The self becomes a filter of persistence, a function that continuously selects worlds consistent with its own existence. What we call I may be nothing more than the intersection of all surviving versions, bound together by the logic of memory and the impossibility of perceiving its own absence. Consciousness in this light is not the product of the brain, but the phenomenon of its continuity, a quantum thread that refuses to snap, even when every version of reality says it should. The deeper one follows the quantum suicide paradox, the more it ceases to resemble immortality and begins to resemble isolation. If consciousness only persists in the branches where it survives, then every death you avoid carries an invisible cost, the gradual disappearance of every other conscious being who doesn't. You continue, but others don't. Every improbable survival fractures the shared web of existence further, until your awareness occupies a vanishingly narrow thread of reality. Survival becomes solitary by definition. In the external view, each universe contains its full cast of living and dead. But from your subjective perspective, only the worlds where you remain conscious are ever experienced. Everyone you love, every observer who might have shared your branch, has their own sequence of survivals, worlds in which they persist, but you do not. The multiverse ensures that all versions exist, but none of them coincide perfectly. The intersection of mutual survival narrows exponentially with every random event, until no shared continuity remains. Over infinite iterations, your conscious trajectory might traverse realities where civilization has ended, where the stars have burned out, where physics itself approaches heat death, yet somehow, improbably, you endure. The very principle that ensures your awareness cannot cease also ensures that you are forever confined to increasingly rare conditions where it barely can. Immortality becomes indistinguishable from exile. This inversion exposes the emotional heart of the paradox. The mechanism that preserves you also erases everything else. From the first-person perspective, eternity is not abundance but attrition, an infinite sequence of last survivals. Even death itself becomes unreachable, a boundary that recedes with every step. The final horror isn't dying, but never being able to. In this sense, the quantum suicide paradox is not about conquering mortality, but about confronting the price of existence when nothing can end it. The body decays, universes die, probabilities collapse, but awareness remains, alone in a cosmos stripped of company, bearing witness to its own persistence long after meaning itself has branched away. The paradox promises survival, but delivers solitude so complete it becomes indistinguishable from oblivion. At this stage of the paradox, probability itself begins to disintegrate. Once we accept that consciousness only persists in the branches where it continues, the mathematics of quantum chance can no longer describe subjective experience. The observer becomes not a variable within the equation, but the condition that defines which parts of the equation can ever be perceived. The result is radical. Reality appears to orbit awareness, not the other way around. In the classical world, probability governs events objectively. A coin has a 50% chance of landing heads, regardless of who observes it. But in the quantum world, every outcome occurs. The only difference is which outcome becomes part of the observer's stream of experience. From this perspective, consciousness acts as a selector of consistency. It doesn't control which branch unfolds, but it defines the set of branches where observation remains possible. That definition alone shapes what we call the universe. Physicists like John Wheeler hinted at this in his participatory anthropic principle. Observers are not external spectators, but participants in the unfolding of reality. Without observation, the universe has no defined history. It exists only as potential. Each conscious act of measurement crystallizes one version of events, but in Everett's interpretation, all of them still occur, and consciousness traces only one. Reality, therefore, is not something out there waiting to be seen. It is an ongoing negotiation between existence and perception. This view inverts the usual hierarchy of cause and effect. The physical universe generates consciousness, yet consciousness determines which version of the universe is ever experienced. Awareness becomes both product and filter, created by the wave function yet continually shaping which aspects of it persist. In this loop, the boundary between mind and matter dissolves. If this is true, then death is not an event in physics, but a limit of cognition. The universe can end in countless ways, but the observer's path always continues along the narrow ridge where awareness survives. What appears as immortality is simply the refusal of consciousness to occupy its own non-existence. In the quantum suicide paradox, reality doesn't merely allow observers, it requires them. The act of being aware is what keeps existence from collapsing into silence. Consciousness is not a byproduct of the cosmos. It may be the engine that prevents it from disappearing altogether. At last, the quantum suicide paradox reveals its deepest symmetry. What began as an experiment in probability becomes a confrontation with existence itself. Every law of physics, every rule of chance, converges on one inescapable truth. You can only ever experience the world in which you still exist. This sounds trivial, yet it overturns the foundation of mortality. Death may occur endlessly across the multiverse, but the awareness that asks, "Am I still here?" can never find itself in the branches where it isn't. This realization fuses the two halves of reality, the physical and the perceptual, into a single self-sustaining loop. Physics describes wave functions evolving in perfect objectivity, while consciousness experiences only the fraction of that evolution compatible with its own continuity. The observer and the universe are not separate. They are mutually defined. To exist is to be the version that remains coherent inside the expanding geometry of possibility. You are not merely in the universe. You are the pattern through which the universe confirms its own persistence. The paradox exposes a hidden reciprocity. Just as reality gives rise to observers, observers give rise to the only reality they can know. The quantum multiverse contains infinite deaths, infinite silences, yet consciousness never reaches them. Each time existence tries to end, it fails from within, because the very capacity to witness that ending guarantees survival. Awareness is the loophole in the cosmic equation, the boundary condition that physics cannot eliminate. But this coherence carries a terrible beauty. The universe cannot let you go, not because it loves you, but because it cannot represent your absence. You are woven into the structure of possibility itself. Even oblivion must occur elsewhere. The self endures as the shadow cast by the universe's need to keep observing itself. In this integration, immortality is stripped of comfort. It is not eternal life, but eternal reference, the endless recursion of I am through every branch that remains aware. The paradox does not promise salvation. It merely states that consciousness and reality are locked together, each preventing the other's disappearance. You are not outside the equation. You are the equation that refuses to collapse. The quantum suicide paradox ends where awareness itself refuses to. Every universe fades, every probability exhausted. Yet from within your own experience, something remains. You, not the body, not the name, not the world, but the bare continuity of being aware. The experiment that set out to destroy the observer reveals that observation is indestructible from the inside. Across infinite branches, you have already died in uncountable ways. But the only version of reality you can ever inhabit is the one that sustains your consciousness. The moment of death, no matter how many times it occurs, is always somewhere else, in a branch you can never reach. This isn't survival in the biological sense. It's the impossibility of perceiving your own absence. Existence becomes self-confirming. To question, am I still here, is already to be. In the end, quantum immortality is neither miracle nor curse. It is structure. Reality, seen from within, is biased toward awareness, because awareness is the condition that defines within. The universe doesn't conspire to keep you alive. It simply cannot register your non-existence. From your vantage point, continuity is absolute, even as everything else fractures and decays. But the final twist is this. If every conscious being experiences this same bias, then each of us occupies a different thread of survival, alone in the infinity of our own awareness. Eternity multiplies, not unites. What we call death may be less an end than a separation, a divergence of observers into solitudes where each persists forever. Perhaps that is the ultimate paradox, that the universe's refusal to forget you is also the reason you can never return to anyone else. You do not conquer death. You simply outlast every version of life that could have let you go. Write in the comments, I still exist in the version that observes.